So my goal has been, and I've just recently really started doing this, is trying to build a single source of truth, utilizing AI to help me do several pieces of the puzzle. And my goal for using AI is not to replace people. My goal is to use AI to elevate people and to elevate our restaurant, right? It's not to destroy, a position, but my thing is if I can handle stuff that my managers are doing or my chefs are having to do for the data automatically, that frees them up to give their undivided attention to our guest, right? Every guest experience needs to be tailored towards that one guest, right? We're a fast casual and people say, well, you're just a fast casual. How do you do that? And it's through us building our systems and processes.
Hello, welcome once again to Deep Current by Oceans. Remember, this is a show for people who actually run hospitality operations and the leaders that make it all possible behind the scenes. I'm your host, Keylor, and today I'm joined by Tracy Carter. He's the owner at JAC's Craft Smokehouse. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Keylor, how are you?
Doing great. Nice to have you here, Tracy. So, before we actually dive in, can you please tell us about your background and your experience, how you ended up in hospitality? I remember we spoke a little bit about this before we actually started recording, but I'd love for our audience to be able to have a full picture of who you are and how you got here.
Cool. Well, it actually started back around 2004, 2005. I worked for a telephone company and had 4 days on, 4 days off, and I wanted salsa one day. And I went to the store. I bought salsa. I didn't like it. Went back to the store, bought salsa again, didn't like it. So I said, heck with this. I'm going to make my own. So I started making salsa and friends got it. Oh man, you should sell this. So I said, okay. So I entered a contest and I won the contest. It was a national contest for amateurs. So I won. And with that, I became Jack's Tailgaters, which was a sauce and seasoning company that we operated from 2005 until about 2015, 16, at which time I'd grown with our company, the telephone company, and started traveling. Then I opened a food truck just that uses just an outlet for me and also a ministry, where we could feed people. And it was in times of need. So I did that. And that started around 2017. Fast forward to 2020, I got laid off from my 20-year job. And me and my wife decided, hey, you cook, they will come. So let's open a restaurant. I did, and here we are today. That's how I got started in the hospitality business. Funny is I worked for McDonald's when I was a kid, and it said, I don't ever want to do that ever again. I don't want to ever work in a restaurant again. And now I own one. So it's kind of
So,
funny.
that's how you landed in hospitality. And actually, that story is not, I mean, most leaders that I've spoken to, interestingly enough, have some organic story about how they ended up in hospitality rather than it being a deliberate career decision. But then what made you stay in the industry?
So I love serving people. I really feel like that's my calling, is to serve. And that's really why I've stayed in this industry. I've got a servant heart. Let me just say that. I think that's the reason.
Well, that's a bit of a response for sure. And definitely one of those things that make people stick to it for sure. So now let's talk a little bit more about Jack's Smoke Craft House. So tell me, give us a sense of scale. Where is it located? How many customers you typically have? What does your team look like?
So Jack's Craft Smokehouse is in West Monroe, Louisiana. Everybody knows West Monroe from the famous show Duck Dynasty. That's the town that we're in. We're a 30-person employee operation, not including my wife and myself. We serve roughly around 3,000 customers a week, maybe if I don't have that exact number in front of me. We have a pretty large catering presence as well. Most of our business is done during lunchtime. We have a strong lunch business and a mediocre evening service. Barbecue's heavy. Going to bed on that, it's a little different. But yeah, again, we started in October of 2020, right in the middle of COVID, and grown into something pretty special. We've seen revenue growth year over year. And so that's the that's where we are today.
That's great. By the way, realizing butchering the restaurant's name. So from now on, let me just call it Jack's, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
that's perfect. That's perfect.
So, Tracy, tell me, what is a part of the operation at Jack's that you're most satisfied with right now? Something that you figured out very early on, or maybe recently, but that you're very happy with and comfortable.
So it all goes back to doing restaurant one-on-one correctly, right? Hot food, hot, cold food, cold, making sure that it's services oriented. One thing I do pride ourselves on is consistency. We have probably the best consistency of any local restaurant around. For us, we I'm very anal when it comes to that. I mean, recipes are weighed out to the gram. If I go in and I don't think something's right, we don't serve it. So consistency is our number one driving thing for us. How you and I met was me just kind of laying out what I'm doing on the back end of our restaurant. It's not what I'm doing out front, but it's on the back end. And I really feel like systems has helped us along the way, right? Both physical systems and automated systems the best we can to help me get to where we are today. I'm a data guy. I was an IT engineer forever at the telephone companies. So I'm a data guy. So I've watched my data closely, and that's what's helped us get to be where we are today.
I'm definitely looking forward to unpack more about that data and technology angle for sure, because I really like that to be a flavor of this show. We can stay kind of on theme there. But let me table that just for a sec. What is a very hard part of your job that most people wouldn't probably figure is part of your job, or maybe wouldn't appreciate?
So it's really making sure we manage our cost of goods. I know a lot of the economy in our world, we're protein centric, right? And everybody knows proteins go up, they go down, they go up, they go down, they go up, they go up, they go up. Then they might drop down a little bit, but not as much as they went up. So it's making sure we balance that because we can't raise prices on our customers, every time the wind blows. And that's exactly so we have to manage. We have to make sure that we're managing every ounce of protein that we have. You know, I don't think people realize what goes into that part of it, especially in a barbecue restaurant. We're the only meat industry where if you say, I want a pound of meat, I have to give you a pound of meat, right? You go to a steakhouse, you order a 16-ounce ribeye. You're not getting 16-ounce ribeye. You're paying for 16 ounces, but you're getting 12 to 14 ounces of ribeye, you know, because of the cook. But us, we have to give you the pound of brisket that you order.
Why is that? Sorry, just a quick
So,
digression.
so you order at a steakhouse, you're ordering a raw product. At a barbecue place, you're ordering a cooked product. So let's take, for instance, a lot of restaurants now that's not I don't want to say the names, but you know what I'm talking about. Those big steakhouses on the inside of the interstates, right? You're having to sell. We have shrinkage in brisket. Okay, let's just use brisket for example. Our yield on a brisket is 55%. That's off of total brisket, we can sell 55% of that brisket because we've lost it to trim and to waste, or to shrinkage during cook time. But you order that, I sell it to you by the pound. So a pound is 55%. I'm pound, and for me to get you 1 pound is a pound and a third to close to a pound and a half, right? To get there. But so I can't charge you for that. It's harder to charge you what it's worth. Ribeye would cost you $45 for a 16-ounce ribeye at a good steakhouse. You come to us, I can only get 32 to $35 a pound for that brisket, right? They didn't lose any money, but I lost money on the back end of that.
Mhm.
So it's a balancing act, right? How do I make sure that we spread that cost around in other items?
So let me press that a little further, just because I'm very curious about this specific thing. Is that, and by the way, because it's also relevant to data and how you make decisions, but is that because of regulation or kind of an unspoken rule of barbecue houses where you have to give them that?
It's unspoken rule. No, it really is. It's just how it was. 'Cause, barbecue back in the day, I would venture to say probably you reach the early 2000s, 2000 between 2002 to 2007. Barbecue was still considered one of those economy type restaurants. and on set a certain few people in the Texas area where it became popular because they took it from traditionalist and started putting a craft on it, right? So from traditional to craft, which caused stuff to rise. I was cooking briskets back in 2005 for around $1.20 a pound. Today, the same brisket is close to $7 a pound. That's raw. That's what you purchase it from. So that's how the inflation's happened. But traditionally, they would go into a barbecue restaurant, let's say Snows in Texas. Oh, I want a pound of beef. So they cut you off a pound of beef, right? And that's what they'd sell. So that's kind of a bit of an unspoken rule through that whole industry. And if you try to change that, I mean, you're changing how we were raised, right? I'm just as a standard.
No, and I think there's a lot of value in that. You're becoming part of this industry, you'd have to follow those rules and that culture. Let's call it a culture,
Right.
right? So,
Right.
despite those challenges, Tracy, you mentioned that you had this is something that we discussed outside of the podcast, but you told me that you've had above 18% year on year growth. So, what's been key? First, keep me honest. Maybe that's the right number. And then, what's been key to maintaining that growth?
So again, it goes back to consistency. We're consistent in our product where you're going to get a good product every time you come. We've been pretty decent about being able to spread those extra costs around so it's not like a sticker shock for people when they come in. We manage our marketing good because we don't do a ton of commercialized marketing. We do some social media marketing, but not a lot. We've allowed word of mouth to take that, so it puts more pressure on us because if somebody's recommending us, we want to make sure that their recommendation is always backed up by our performance, right? So that's been the key to our growth is really that, and then us making sure we hit those avenues like catering, getting stronger in those areas, going out for those ones that most people won't go after, staying true to who we are, not going outside of our menu repertoire, but like those different sizes, like currently today we have meta people that are building some data sites. Not many people can handle 2 or 3,000 people at a time. We can, so we we'll go for them, right? We won't be shy. And that's just been here recently. That hasn't attributed to our growth, all our growth, but here recently, it's a huge piece of it. So we started separating the catering piece off of our main business, and we're still seeing the growth. You know,
Amazing. That is actually a nice segue into a question I wanted to bring back from your intro as you were discussing how you're implementing systems. It also touches on your IT background. So I think this is probably going to resonate quite a lot with you. But consistency is very difficult without predictability, systems, automation to some degree. And it's clear to me that you have your finger on the pulse of that. So, can you tell me about your stack? I mean, technologically speaking, what are some of your systems and tools that you rely upon at least today?
okay, so today, if you look at our restaurant stack, I have Toast as my POS system. I have Margin Edge as my inventory system. I have Seven Shifts as my labor system. And then you bring all that together. What used to live in spreadsheets is now living through some AI documents and AI agents that I've built for our company. So I'm just kind of bringing that together. The restaurant industry suffers unless you have your own IT part department of having a single source of truth, right? Most of us independents do not have a single source of truth. We have segmented data from all these different systems. That drives me insane. It drives me nuts. So my goal has been, and I've just recently really started doing this, is trying to build a single source of truth utilizing AI to help me do several pieces of the puzzle. And my goal for using AI is not to replace people. My goal is to use AI to elevate people and to elevate our restaurant, right? It's not to destroy, a position, but my thing is if I can handle stuff that my managers are doing or my chefs are having to do for the data automatically, that frees them up to give their undivided attention to our guest, right? Every guest experience needs to be tailored towards that one guest, right? We're a fast casual and people say, well, you're just a fast casual. How do you do that? and it's through us building our systems and processes that allows us to make each guest feel like they're special.
I think you touched on a very interesting topic there because when I talk to leaders in this industry, the ones that are actually investing in technology or have maybe a dedicated team or a person even that's looking at systems and trying to create this interconnectivity, it's is rare. I mean, it's not everybody, and maybe because the industry is associated with being highly human, they miss out on so much value that comes from actually leveraging that technologies. Would be what would you tell somebody who's kind of on the fence about putting some money into interconnectedness and good systems and a good POS and maybe even a technical team?
Yeah. So I would say do it. And it's hard for me to sit here because I know how tight it is for an independent business to have the margins to be able to afford that. The thing that I've noticed when I started out, granted, I'm a data guy. Before I purchased my first POS before we opened, I had 30, 40 different demos of all these different POS systems out there. And it came down to three, and I brought all three of them on the same freaking call to just have it out, but I looked at it from a data perspective. I wasn't looking at it from a cost perspective, and the reason I went with what I went with is because they have the connectability that's made easy for all these other systems to semi talk to, but not really give you the data, all the data you need. But I say all that because without that, there is no way for you to manage your food cost, to manage your labor, to manage the noise that your corporate restaurants are doing out behind you. We're never going to be able to compete with them on price as an independent until what we can compete with them on though is knowing our customers, knowing what they like, knowing our cost, and developing a process and a system to continue to keep our customer. The number one biggest cost, the biggest cost for any restaurant is keeping a customer, right? It's not going out and getting a new one. It's keeping a customer. And people don't realize that, you have to perform day in, day out. You have to make sure that that customer that spends and keeps coming back, they feel a different experience by saying, but in the same way every time they come, right? They get, I have a customer that's been coming to our restaurant since the day we've opened. He's got probably close to 8 or 900 visits with us since we've opened. And he tells me, he says, because every time I come, I feel like I'm wanted here. I feel welcomed. I feel that you try to give me something new every time. And the reason we can do that is through our tech stack system because we know him, right? Not just by us seeing him, we know his habits. So we can take what we've learned from him by his spending and tailor his experience to that, right? So you save money by spending a little bit of money.
That is beautiful put. And it brings me back to another guest that I interviewed. His name is Pierre Larson. He's director of operations. They own three restaurants. And this, he didn't come up with this, but he mentioned to me that customers, like maybe you have a customer come the first time, the likelihood of them returning is about 40%. They come a second time, the likelihood is about 40%. But if for the third time that they come, if you manage to give them a good experience, the likelihood goes up to like 77%. So it's like there are marginal gains in the opportunity to keep a customer and retain them on the long term and for them to become regulars in the first couple of visits. But then you catch them on the third and then they become a lifelong customer. So I guess what you're talking, I mean, reminds me a lot of that. But how do you do that? How do you factor that into the way that you do things and that you operate?
So again, it goes back to me understanding our traffic flow. And what he said is 100% correct. We know if we can get you back in that door three times, we have you. We have you for life as long as we don't do something to screw it up, right? If we continue to operate consistently the same way over and over, we will. But on the same hand, we also have to see if their habits change a little bit, and if they do, we need to try to make sure we change with them within and I want to be real careful here how I say that. We don't chase rainbows, right? We stay within our realm of what we do. But let's say this guy liked a burger today, but all of a sudden he switched over to quesadillas, right? What are we going to do to make sure he keeps coming back and doesn't get burnt out on that? So, let's offer him this now because we see what they're purchasing constantly. Now let's see if we can, before he gets burnt out, let's get him this. And that's exactly what we do. We try to make them go from pieces of the menu to the next piece of the menu so they don't ever get burned out on something. And then we make sure they feel welcome
Absolutely.
every time.
While we're in the topic of data, and before we move into anything else, walk me through. Here's what I want to know. You said that you have these three systems. By the way, it's a very typical stack. I mean, the operators that I've interviewed that have a very effective, very fast paced type of way of measuring data. These three tools that you brought up are actually quite up there in that equation. But then it's the extra layer that interests me. You said then through AI, you're able to interconnect some of this data to make better decisions. What is that? What is the type of data? What are the data points that made you go, I need a way to extract it from all of these places and look at it in either a single place or however you structure that?
Each one of those places, they have API connections. Eh, Some of that data is very limited, what you can get, especially like with Toast, because Toast in, is tr- in reality is pretty much a credit card processing place company. So they're real on how you can get into their system, you know? So we've had to take that data and we had to pull that into a database, which we use Google Cloud for. And then we've taken that data and what it automatically talks to with Margin Edge, we've taken that data and mapped it to our recipes, right? Within Margin Edge have done that. And then we've taken that menu mix and pulled that data out of Margin Edge and put it in that database. And then, of course, our labor piece of the puzzle, it flows. So we usually can grab that labor allotment and labor piece out of Toast already. So we do that, the labor summary out of there. And then how we've taken that data and utilized it, which everybody can do that part. They can get most of their basic data just by your PMix report out of Toast, your labor report out of Toast, and your theoretical and your actuals out of Margin Edge. And that'll allow you to run a great business. It will. But when you work in a place like we had to start looking at contribution, right? Not just your food cost percentage. What's our contribution rate to our business for each menu item? And what we found is that Toast or Margin Edge didn't really break down stuff like, let's say we do a two meat plate. A two meat plate with brisket and ribs on it the ingredients cost is much higher than a two meat plate with brisket and pulled pork, right? Or ribs and pulled pork. So our contribution rates, we saw that they would do this and do this. So the only way that we were able to spot that is by putting all our data into one place and being able to categorize and see what our options were being ordered. So without that, we were not priced correctly, right? Because we found that our most ordered products on the two meat plate was our two most expensive meats together. So we were not pricing us to succeed the way we needed to be. Yeah, we were hitting our food cost, but the problem is we weren't getting a higher dollar contribution rate off of that. So we had to go back and readjust our pricing based off of that. And that's the way we do it today, continuously look at that contribution rate to see where we're at. It's hard to push in our business. It's hard to push people off to a higher contribution recipe. Like we know pulled pork's great, but people come to us for brisket. So I'm not going to take those people that are eating our brisket and get them to go eat our pulled pork. That's just not going to happen. That's human nature, right? We'd like to say we are. I mean, I can just about give away the pork and they're still going to get that brisket. So I had to know that. I had to know how can I adjust to accommodate them without forcing them out of the market, but also keep us at a profit margin that we can stay successful.
See, this is exactly the example that this show is for. It's this type of thing that makes other people that may already be running operations go like, "That's right. I haven't even thought of that, or I wouldn't even know because I don't have a way of knowing that information." So definitely a fascinating example. If we go back to the guest experience, because it sounds like you also have it pretty nailed down. How do you know who your best guests are? How often they come? and what to do specifically for them so that they can continue to return. I mean, tell me about your system to returning customers.
Okay, so that's our loyalty program, right? We have a loyalty program through Toast, and we can track that way. Some people don't like to get in there, so I really try to train our staff to notice our regulars, and they start notating, hey, I seen this guy, he's not on our loyalty program, I seen him. Or they'll give a tag, we'll tag the table where we can go by and see them, as the managers, and be able to talk to them, and then eventually we get them into our loyalty program that way, and that way we can track all their moves of what they buy, how often they come, that kind of stuff, right? So, and that's a number, that's a matrix number that we look at, is who is our regular customers, how many times a week do they come, or how many times a month do they come, you know, because that way we can target them, especially in email marketing and stuff. So I'm not a big spammer, again, I tell you, I'm from the IT world, so I hate emails. But I do know it's a necessary evil. So what we've done is tried to tailor those emails where they're not bombarding you. If you're one of those customers that, hey, I only want to get emailed once a quarter, guess what? You're only getting the email once a quarter. So we're segmenting data is really what we're doing with our customers.
That is amazing. So it starts to be clear to me why you have healthy growth. I mean, all of these things definitely factor. These are all very high quality decisions and definitely factor into that. Again, staying on the topic of guests, one question that I like to ask always, because the answer is always different, is the mix of services that you offer or the ones that generate the highest revenue. For example, I've noticed that for higher end restaurants in very picturesque locations, it would be like 80% of reservations and then maybe 20% walk-ins. But restaurants that are in the middle of a city or in a known road, they have a higher percentage of walk-ins versus reservations. And then catering is part of the mix as well. You already said you see an increase in catering, which typically is an easier process to get through. Like you get a higher bill, let's say, at once, but it's a little bit more involved. So what is your mix? And it doesn't have to be specific numbers, but I mean, roughly, I
So,
imagine you have a
uh,
pretty clear picture.
so we really, our catering's about 15% of our business. Believe it or not, you're looking at approximately 30 to 35% is takeout and to go, through third party delivery, online ordering, walk up to the counter to go. And then the rest is dine in for us. So we have a pretty decent mix of all three of our monetary gain systems that we through. So we have a pretty decent mix, right? And the biggest thing that has shocked me is the growth in the third party and to go business, the online. It's really shocked me because I mean, we're on DoorDash, Uber Eats, but our menu is 22% higher on those platforms than they are online, you know? And so that's a number that shocks me that our growth in that area has been so significant. But that brings us back to systems and stuff. So what we've done with that is actually started trying to find ways to communicate to those third party customers, right? Hey, come to our website. You get to sign up one with our loyalty program. So you're going to end up getting some free stuff, right? And second is you're going to save money on your food because the Toast has a partnership with DoorDash and Uber Eats and stuff like that. So it's just really a flat delivery fee depending on your location, how much it is, right? But you still save money. But now what that's done is give us that person's data instead of third party delivery data. And when customers that I can't get, I try. I don't succeed at this all the time, just simply because it's a little harder to do. Is get on the DoorDash thing when that somebody leaves a review, talks about that, or we write a little note on their order when it goes out. Hey, thank you, that kind of stuff. So we've converted those customers to either online or starting to come into the business. You know,
Yeah, that's definitely smart. I also have spoken to leaders who are trying to minimize because it's almost like a channel that keeps growing within their mix of revenue automatically without them doing anything. But of course, fees are higher, so it's actually kind of a fight to keep it as low in relationship with the dinings and the catering as possible, for sure. And
yeah.
then, sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, the reason we started it, I didn't start it until 2 years ago. And the only reason I did that was to fill a dead space, right? Yes, I was giving away that money, but what it was doing was paying for the employees that I had to keep there. And it was also paying for the product. So it was really more of a stay, how do operating cost thing. That's all that was to protect overhead during that 2 to 4:30 mark. And now that it's just really taken over, it's starting to get more and more and more and more. So,
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess that's something that's really hard to fight with because it's just the way people have food these days. They just want to be at home and order. But then there's something we could break down even further, which is the dine-ins. How many just walk in through the door and just sit them down, and how many actually book a table beforehand?
yeah, so we don't do reservations that often. We'll ask people if they have a large party to give us a call because I'm a barbecue place for one, and when I run out, I run out. I can't throw a brisket on the smoker and it be ready in 20 minutes. I can't do that. So we do ask for that, but we don't typically do a lot of reservations. It's just because we stay busy. We open the door to a line and then go all through lunch. We'll serve 85% of our customers between 11 and 1:30, you know, and that's pretty decent, amount. Since we're fast casual, we don't actually track guests, we track tickets, and some of those tickets can have 15, 20 people on them. I mean, we'll have we'll have a couple of companies that bring their whole team in, every day. That's the way it is. It'll be like 15, 20 people show up with the sales guy. Hey, I'm taking y'all to lunch today. Let's go. And they'll come there. Right. So we run probably at lunch somewhere around 240 in covers, which that could, each one of those covers could have anywhere from 1 to 15 people on them, you know, through there. So our biggest thing of is that's why we don't take reservations.
Hmm. No, that makes sense. And I actually suspected that. And that's why I was telling you. It's so wild to see the difference because some other place have told me, hey, 80% of the people we get are reservations. But it's just very, very much related to their location and general context, I guess. But let's talk a little bit for a moment about food cost because it seems to me that you're very clear about food cost, very mindful of it. And it's also one of the areas where sometimes there's a really wide gap between what the operators and leaders know is happening versus what's actually happening in real life. So, what is your approach beyond margin? Sorry, you'll keep me on margin X, right?
Margin edge.
Margin edge, right? So, I know beyond that, right? How do you manage inventory and ordering so that it stays somewhat predictable?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's systems, right? First off, let's talk about the most important thing that any restaurant owner can have is budget and recipe costing cards. And that is the number one and number two thing that you can have. If you don't have those two, you're doomed from the beginning. Stop doing what you're doing until you until you get those in place because you'll never know what your costs are and what you can actually afford to spend, right? And where your costs need to be. So the number one thing is how I do it. Recipe costing cards, those are hosted in Margin Edge because that's our inventory system as well, right? Recipe costing cards that get updated every time an invoice comes in. That's the reason why you need a software like Margin Edge. And I don't want to sound like a Margin Edge, what you call it, a promoter. You can use any inventory system that will automatically update once you upload your invoice to that system. Preferably, that system will do an EDI with your purveyors to be able to update automatically so you're not having to scan a picture and put it in. So that's number one. Make sure that your recipe costing cards are always up to date. Number two, taking inventory weekly. I know that's a dirty word, but it needs to be done weekly. There is no way you can take inventory once a month and be successful week in and week out because now you're reacting instead of being proactive, right? You have to be proactive with your food cost and making sure your waste is there, your key items that are not key item tracker. I run two key item trackers, one for all the key components like brisket, and stuff like that. So we kind of watch that to make sure that we don't forget to order some key items for one thing, right? When we need to order. Second is that we watch stuff for theft, right? Things that could be stolen. That's another key because A lot of restaurants have a problem with a percentage of theft, right? And it may only be 1%, but that's 1% that goes against your food cost, right? So if you're running a very tight margin, say you need to think industry standards between 25 and 30%, which is almost sometimes impossible. In my business, it's not. I can't do it. But anyway, at least not 25%. But if you run in that and you're making your bare minimum profit, you lose a 1% to theft that you're not accounting for. That's 1% of your profits gone, right? So you have to start monitoring that. Third thing is making sure you're watching your waste. Keep your waste logs, and see, and then educate once you start seeing a pattern of waste. Like if you have a grill cook that say you're a steak restaurant and that grill you're getting steaks back constantly, why? Why am I getting that back? Start asking those whys, those whys. And because once you see that waste, it could be that your grill cook needs some more training. You see what I'm saying? Or it could be that your grill cook doesn't care. And so it's time to find a new grill cook. Those are the pieces of the puzzle that you have to monitor constantly, and that helps your food cost, believe it or not. I guess you're muted.
Sorry, I'm gonna do that again. We can probably cut here for a moment. So yeah, that is exactly right. I mean, food cost definitely runs high in the industry. From what I've spoken about with other leaders, most feel that their food cost is still 4 to 6 points above where they'd like it to be. So even still, and theft, like you say, if it's 1%, that's 1% that goes into that. So even with such control and such good inventory management, do you ever have to 86 menu items?
We do, but again, sometimes that's that's on us, right? We're a barbecue restaurant, so we will cook to run out every day. So our 86 is that reason, not because we didn't order something. You know,
Mhm.
it's that most of our proteins, and you'll find it that we 86 proteins during the day. We do try, we've used history, but at the end of the day, I don't want to have 4 or 5 briskets left on the shelf, because that could be 25, 30 pounds at the end of the day. So I cook to what our history tells us we're selling, and then maybe a tad bit more, because I will not sell you that brisket that I cooked today. Tomorrow, as a center of the plate, it has to go into something different. And there's just times you don't always have time to do something different every day, So that's kind of why it's imperative to know for your prep what your history is, what you feel like you're going to be selling the day of. It goes back to we mentioned P mix earlier. How much are you selling? Don't look at it as a week. Let's look at it day by day, right? That kind of stuff.
And then what role does the staffing and scheduling play into those costs that run in the operation every day? You mentioned you use 7 shifts, right?
We do. We use 7 shifts as our scheduling tool. So we have a labor budget for that we work off of every week. It's based off forecasted sales, right? The percentage. And so we create templates in 7 shifts for what that forecasted week is like. And we try to stick to it, we do. But if we see we're not making our targets, we first ask for volunteers, and second, then we cut, right? We got to make sure that stays healthy as well. We make sure that we explain this in our pre-shifts. Hey guys, listen, every time y'all know the drill. We're gonna ask for volunteers if we're not as busy as we thought we should be. You know, it's nothing against you today. It's to make sure you have a place to come to tomorrow. That's kind of how we do that.
Mhm.
Labor plays a lot into your prime cost, right? We really like to try as a as my restaurant, I really like to try to run between 50 and 55 on prime cost, and that's just your food cost plus your labor, right? That's the percentage there. So we're trying to maintain that. It doesn't always happen, but for the most part it does, because we've controlled both those aspects.
Great. Well, let's shift Tracy a little bit more toward forward-looking perspective for you and your business. If you could fix something about the way that your operation is running right now, not something that's beyond your control, but something that you know you could probably fix, but has been pushed aside, or maybe you haven't figured out how, or maybe it's in the bucket list somewhere. Is there something that comes to mind?
Man, yes. I mean, we've talked about all these systems, stuff, and the pieces that I'm building, I'd honestly continue for that growth to be a little more automated too, instead of little pieces automated and then manual, the rest of the manual pieces. I would love to fix all that automated so things just flowed a little bit smoother. And that's really what I'd fix. I would really continue to fix on our tech stack. It would become more dynamic and gives us even more data than it's given us today. I think I told you before, independence has to fight through the noise of corporate restaurants, right? So, and not taking anything away from them. It's just that their pocketbooks are a little bit deeper. They have a louder voice than we have. So the only way we can compete with them is through carving our way through that noise. And the way to do that is to have a strong data set to know where your customers are and what they're doing.
So now that you say that, what is the actual biggest opportunity that an independent operator can have to compete against the big corps? And you're saying data, right? Do you have to, if you were sitting in front of somebody who is in a similar situation but maybe not doing as well as you have done, and they're just wondering where to start, that's going to make a real data night type of change. What is that biggest opportunity in your mind?
So the number one thing, I said it just a few minutes ago, you first start competing with the big boys by making sure your ship is shored up. And that's budget, recipe costing cards, and tight labor schedule, right? That's the number one things right there. And once you get that, when you learn to manage those systems and you manage them correctly, your sky's the limit for you, because now you can handle growth or you can fix the pieces that you're not doing. Look, 9 times out of 10, restaurants don't fail because bad food. Restaurants fail because the chaos is in that comes with being in a restaurant, right? We fail to manage the chaos, and that's the biggest piece of the puzzle. I learned that quick. So, Kaylor, when Christy and I opened the restaurant, we were busier than we could shake a stick at. I mean, we were slammed. I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what to manage. I didn't. I drove to Texas, and I'll put this out there just because I'm sure there's people in this boat. I drove to Texas to meet with some friends in the barbecue industry, just as trying to learn, pick their brains. I mean, because I had so much product going out the door and money coming in, but I wasn't making any money. And so that was a big thing that I was going to ask for help with. Tell me how y'all are doing this. So I was visiting with them, and I was on my way back. I stopped. I was out of gas. I'm 3.5 hours from put my debit card into the machine to pay for gas. Couldn't do it. Second thing is, tried another one. Didn't have no money in that one either. I'm like, crap, what am I gonna do? And so I dug and I found money to get gas out of my truck. But anyway, that moment right there was the moment that was pivotal for me. It was like, how in the heck did I get to this point where bringing in this amount of money, blah, 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 how did I get here? So I went on a search. I did. I went on a search. I hired a coach. Was not the greatest coach in the world. I did learn something from him. So I can't say that, you know, I learned a little bit, but I still wasn't doing anything. I still wasn't making money. I still didn't understand why. I haven't taken a paycheck. I'm not one of these that takes money out of your business, right? I'm just not. My wife is making very little. We were paying our home bills. Luckily, we didn't have a lot of debt. So that ought to tells you something right there. So anyway, so I found another coach, can I say the name
You
of
can
who
say
I
that.
found?
Sure.
Yeah, it was David Scott Peters. He has the Restaurant Prosperity Formula, and I started engulfing YouTube of what he had. Now, both of those, podcast and YouTube, leads you only so far, right? And I was like, I just can't afford this guy. I have no money, but I was still implementing these pieces. At the time I had Craftable was my inventory system. I had it, but I didn't know how to use it. I didn't know how to use it. And but I had it. So I'm like, okay, I've got to start digging into this system. So I started applying what I learned from him on these podcasts and stuff and started putting it into place. Started seeing my needle move. Started seeing that needle move. Made sure my recipe costing cards were up. Come to find out, I was making all this money, but all the money was going away. Why? Because my food cost or my prime cost was at 78%. 78% prime. So my food cost was absorbent My labor was stupid, you know? And so that's the reason why I go back to that. And then I finally signed on with David Scott Peters. And by the time I got there, I'd already implemented a lot of stuff and he helped me tweak it. But the pieces of the puzzle was budget and recipe costing cards. Those two pieces right there opened my eyes up to what I needed. One, I was so entrenched and I was being the pit master, I was being the chef, I was being the manager, I was being all those roles, and I couldn't see the forest because of the trees, if that makes sense. You know?
Absolutely.
So that's the number one piece. If you're sitting here and you're struggling, start with your budget, start with your recipe costing cards and see what you're not managing because it's so easy to get caught up in the glare and the flare of a restaurant and it eats you alive slowly. And that's what it was doing to Christina.
Wow. Well, that is a fantastic story and a phenomenal note to kind of start ending the show in, seeing that we have a few more minutes. But I'm glad I asked you that question, Tracy. There's so much insight there. And before I let you go, I'd like to hit you with a very quick lightning round. Just a couple of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to mind. No overthinking, just something snappy, something quick, whatever's at the top of your head. Okay. So let me start with this one. What is the most overrated thing in hospitality technology now?
Lord. Automation. It's funny I say that, but it's automation because nothing is in a single source of truth. So automation is kind of pointless.
Out of all the systems you described today, what is the one that you couldn't run without?
Margin edge.
I've heard toast before, margin edge. So, like some people have their weights assigned to them. So it's interesting you would say that. What is the best experience you've had as a guest and what made it stand out?
Wow. So believe it or not, the best experience I had came from a restaurant that's fairly new in our town. They just made us feel like kings. You know, their service, steps of service was beautiful and ran flawlessly. And we just felt like kings and queens, you know, in there. Food was okay. It wasn't great, but the experience and the service from the service out made that day, that night so enjoyable. You know, I didn't feel exhausted. You know what I'm talking about. You feel exhausted sometimes when you go to a restaurant. You get out, it's like, man, that was hard. So try not to. So that's been my best experience. Is their steps of service was beautiful.
Gotcha. And then let me close on this one. If you were in hospitality today, what would you be doing now?
I'd still be in the IT world. That's what I'd
Yeah,
be.
kind of figured you would say that. You still clearly have a synergy and a knack for it. So absolutely. Well, Tracy, we're at the end of our time, but I mean, this has been an excellent conversation. I think those insights you shared are going to be massively valuable for many of the guests, especially those that might be struggling with some of the same things that you at some point struggle with. So genuinely appreciate everything. Where can our listeners keep up with you and everything you're doing at JAX?
So you can follow us on Facebook, Jack's Craft Smokehouse. You can follow me on LinkedIn, either Jack's Craft Smokehouse or Tracy Carter. Look for me. I think I have, you can look for my mug. You see it here. You can see it there. But, and also just, you know, either one of those places, if you have questions, reach out to me. I don't mind sharing. Somebody help me. I'm going to pay it forward, you know? So if you're struggling, let me know. And I can see if I can help you. If not, help you find the people that can help you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tracy. Thanks everybody for listening to Deep Korean once again. If you are an operator dealing with any of the challenges Tracy and I talked about here today and would like to keep that conversation going, reach out to Tracy or reach out to us at oceansco.com and we'll love to have that conversation. Until then, I'll see you next time.